Before this story truly begins, do me one small favor. If you enjoy intense survival stories where humans prove why the galaxy underestimates them, tap the like button, subscribe for more HFY sci-fi, and comment below what you would do if you crashed on a death world. Now let's begin. The screaming started 3 seconds before impact. Alarms howled through the cockpit, shrill and feral, overlapping warnings in half a dozen alien languages that all meant the same thing: catastrophic failure. The mercenary didn't bother reading the displays. He already knew. The ship was dying, and so, by every statistical measure the Galactic Coalition trusted, was he. Through the fractured canopy, the planet rushed up to meet him, green-black, thunder-churned, wrapped in electric storms that clawed at the atmosphere. Sensors had labeled it only 2 minutes earlier. Death World, Class Oblivion. The mercenary laughed once, a dry sound torn from a cracked throat. Of course it was. He was human. Luck, as usual, had teeth. The last thing he did before the ship tore itself apart was lock his crash harness, inject every combat stim his suit would allow without instantly stopping his heart, and mutter a single habit-worn word: survive. The impact was not a single moment, but a sequence of violence. Metal screamed. Gravity tripled, then quadrupled. The world inverted. Something punched through his left shoulder. Fire swallowed the cockpit, then vanished when the crash suppression foam detonated. The ship plowed through a forest of ironwood trees before finally coming to rest embedded nose first in black volcanic soil. Silence followed. Heavy. Listening. The mercenary drifted in and out of consciousness, breaths shallow and expensive. His suit's med system fought to stabilize him, cycling pain dampeners and pumping clotting agents into torn flesh. Bones were fractured but intact. Organs bruised, not ruptured. By the brutal accounting of battlefield survival, he was alive. Most species wouldn't have been. When his eyes finally opened, the first thing he saw was the sky, too big, too close, threaded with violet lightning that leapt from cloud to cloud like living things. The second thing he noticed was the gravity. Every breath felt like lifting a weight. Every muscle trembled under its pull. He forced himself upright with a grunt that became a cough. Crimson spattered the inside of his helmet. The cockpit was a ruin. Nothing long-range worked. Power reserves were dwindling. Weapons were limited. A sidearm. A combat knife. A few explosives meant for boarding actions, not wilderness survival. No rescue beacon answered his signal. The mercenary dragged himself from the wreckage, boots crunching against obsidian soil. The forest beyond was dead quiet in a way that set his nerves screaming. Not peaceful. Alert. As if the entire ecosystem had frozen, waiting to see if he would die on his own. Then the ground shuddered. Not from an explosion. From weight. He froze, one hand tightening around his pistol. The tremor came again, rhythmic, deliberate. Something vast was moving through the forest, snapping trees thick as starship struts. Birds, if they could be called that, burst from the canopy and fled in panicked swarms. Smaller creatures scattered, fleeing not toward cover, but away from a single direction. The mercenary slowly turned. The trees parted. It stepped into view without haste, as if time itself bent to make room for it. The apex predator of the death world stood taller than an armored transport, its body a brutal fusion of muscle, armored plating and blade-edged bone. Its eyes were forward-facing, luminous and cold, fixed entirely on him. Each breath it took misted the air with heat. This was not an animal that hunted for food. This was something that enforced dominance. The mercenary knew the odds instantly. No human record showed successful solo engagement with a death world apex of this scale. Coalition doctrine didn't even attempt plans for it. This was a thing fleets avoided, a creature entire species went extinct learning to fear. It lowered its head and roared. The sound slammed into him like a physical force, rattling his teeth and vibrating in his bones. His instincts, honed across 100 battlefields, screamed at him to drop, to freeze, to submit. He didn't. Human hands shook as he raised the pistol, not because he expected to win, but because surrender had never saved him before. Blood dripped from his sleeve, dark against his armor. His vision tunneled. His heart pounded so hard it blurred thought. Still he stood. The predator advanced one massive step. The mercenary fired. The shot was insignificant. The round sparked against reinforced hide and fell uselessly to the dirt. The creature halted anyway, tilting its head. Not in pain. In curiosity. It stared at him. Not as prey exactly. Not as an equal. Something different. The mercenary coughed, sagged, then forced himself upright again with sheer stubbornness. He didn't retreat. Didn't beg. Didn't look away. He adjusted his grip on the pistol and spat blood onto the ground between them, a small, defiant stain claiming space he had no right to claim. "If you're going to kill me," he rasped, voice barely steady, "then do it." The forest held its breath. For a long, terrible moment, the apex predator simply watched him, golden eyes unblinking. Then, unexpectedly, it took another step, past him. Its massive head turned slightly, just enough for one eye to remain on the human as it moved between him and the darkening forest beyond. A shadow shifted in the distance. Something else large. Something hunting. The predator let out a low, warning growl that vibrated through the ground, a sound not meant for the human at all. Whatever lurked beyond retreated immediately, vanishing without a sound. The mercenary stood there, stunned, as the apex settled a few paces away, sitting like a living wall of muscle and bone. Not attacking. Not leaving. Guarding. Pain finally won. His legs buckled. He hit the ground hard, vision blurring as consciousness slipped. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the creature lowering its massive head, studying him with an intelligence the galaxy had sworn could not exist in beasts like it. And for the first time since he'd crashed, the mercenary realized something terrifying. The death world had not rejected him. It was deciding what to do with him next. Consciousness returned in fragments, strung together by pain and the steady, crushing pull of the planet's gravity. The mercenary surfaced from darkness expecting fangs at his throat or nothing at all. Instead he woke to warmth. It was wrong enough that his eyes snapped open instantly. He lay on his side in a shallow depression where the ground had been scraped bare, the cracked hull of his crash suit half buried beneath fallen leaves and splintered stone. His helmet was gone. Cool, mineral-scented air burned his lungs with every breath. Something vast loomed close enough that he could feel heat radiating against his back. Slowly, carefully he turned his head. The apex predator crouched beside him, massive body curled protectively around the hollow like a living barricade. Its armored plates bore fresh cuts stained dark with blood that was not its own. The creature's eyes opened as he moved, locking onto his with unnerving focus. Neither of them moved. The mercenary's first instinct was to reach for his pistol. His second, more rational thought stopped him cold. If the predator had wanted him dead, he wouldn't be waking up to anything at all. The creature watched as his hand twitched, then stilled as if memorizing the tension rather than reacting to it. He swallowed. His throat felt raw, each breath scraping past damage he hadn't felt yet. He tested his body with professional detachment. Shoulder torn but stabilized. Ribs cracked. Muscles locked in protest but functional. The med system had done its work. What it hadn't done was explain why he was still alive. The predator's nostrils flared. It lowered its head slightly, bringing one enormous eye level with his. He could see himself reflected there, blood-smeared, small, stubbornly awake. A lesser mind might have called the gaze curious. He recognized it as evaluative. "You dragged me," he muttered, more to anchor himself than to communicate. The creature's throat vibrated, producing a low, resonant sound that was neither threat nor comfort. The ground beneath them hummed in faint response, as if the death world itself acknowledged the voice. Something moved in the trees. The predator's head snapped up instantly. Its entire body shifted, placing itself between the mercenary and the forest with instinctive precision. Muscles coiled. Claws dug furrows into rock-hard soil. Whatever had been watching vanished at the first sound of the creature's warning rumble. The mercenary exhaled slowly. Understanding began to take shape, unsettling in its clarity. He wasn't a prisoner. And he wasn't prey. He was an anomaly. Time stretched in the silence that followed. The predator did not leave. It did not strike. It simply remained near enough that escape, if escape was even possible, was no longer the central concern. Survival was. And survival, for the moment, depended on mutual restraint. The mercenary shifted, wincing as pain lanced through his side. The creature reacted instantly, head lowering again, eyes narrowing as if to measure the source of weakness. One massive claw pressed into the earth near his torso, not touching him, but close enough to remind him what could. "Easy," he breathed, lifting one hand slowly, palm out. Not a threat. Not submission. A gesture that had kept him alive among unfriendly species before. The predator's pupils contracted. It leaned in, breath washing over his skin, hot and metallic. He felt the vibration travel through his ribs and into his bones. Then, improbably, it withdrew. A boundary had been acknowledged. Night fell swiftly, the sky darkening beneath churning storm clouds. Bioluminescent veins lit the forest with ghostly blue and green hues, outlines of towering growths and distant movement barely contained in the glow. The mercenary forced himself to sit up, knowing the longer he stayed prone, the more likely he'd lose control of his body to shock. The predator watched him struggle without intervening. "You're not saving me," he murmured, realization settling in. "You're testing me." The creature tilted its head. The motion carried no hesitation, only attention. It had not intervened when he fired. It had not killed him when he collapsed. It had not left when his usefulness was uncertain. It was waiting to see if he could keep standing. The mercenary pushed himself to one knee, then to both feet. His legs shook violently, but he didn't fall. He locked his jaw and forced his spine straight, meeting the predator's gaze again. The act cost him more pain than any weapon wound he'd ever endured, and he suspected the creature knew that. The forest whispered around them. Somewhere distant, something screamed, a sharp, dying sound cut mercifully short. The apex predator did not turn toward it. Its attention never left the human. Enough, it seemed to decide. The creature turned its massive head and made a short, abrupt motion, a gesture that was unmistakable in its intent. The mercenary hesitated only long enough to brace himself. He took a limping step forward. The predator began to walk, unhurried, yet each stride swallowed meters of ground. It did not look back, but it did slow, matching his pace with deliberate consideration. They moved through terrain that would have killed him alone. Thorned growths parted under the creature's bulk. Lesser predators fled ahead of their approach. Once, something lunged from the underbrush, too fast to see clearly. The apex struck it down without breaking stride, the kill precise and efficient. No display. No excess. The mercenary understood then that dominance here was not proven through cruelty, but through certainty. They reached a cavernous outcropping carved into a mountainside, partially concealed by twisted roots and stone falls. Heat radiated faintly from within, shielding the entrance from wind and rain. The predator paused, turning its head enough that one eye settled on him again. This was an invitation or a test of another kind. The mercenary stepped inside. The space beyond opened into a vast natural chamber, its walls scarred by claw and impact, littered with the remains of things that had failed to leave alive. The predator followed, settling near the entrance where it could see both inside and out. The mercenary collapsed against the inner wall, breath ragged, vision dimming. He should have been terrified. Instead, exhaustion dragged him toward sleep with the uneasy knowledge that he had passed something he hadn't known he was being judged on. As his eyes closed, he heard the predator shift, positioning itself so its body shielded the cavern mouth. Whatever decision it was making, it had not ended. It had only just begun. The mercenary woke to the sensation of movement and the expectation of death, instincts firing before thought. His hand snapped to where his pistol should have been, only to find cold stone and scattered fragments of gear arranged neatly within reach instead of beneath an unfamiliar claw. Light filtered into the cavern in fractured bands, refracted through crystalline veins embedded in the rock. The storm outside had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean. His injuries burned dully rather than screaming, which meant the med system was still functioning. Barely. Across the chamber, the apex predator lay sprawled on its side, massive chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. Old scars crisscrossed its hide, pale and jagged, layered atop one another in a history written by violence and survival. This was not a creature newly crowned. It was an old ruler that had bled for every breath it kept. The mercenary sat up slowly, testing his weight. The predator's eye opened instantly, fixing on him with unimpaired focus. It remained where it was, but awareness radiated from it like heat. "I'm awake," the mercenary said quietly, absurdly aware of how small his voice was in the cavern. "Not going anywhere." The creature's eyelids slid shut again, though its breathing did not change. Permission then. Or acknowledgement. The distinction mattered less than the outcome. Hunger struck him shortly after, sharp enough to make him dizzy. He fumbled through what remained of his rations, finding only cracked nutrient bars and dehydrated protein slurry. Death world gravity demanded calories his supplies no longer could provide. As if drawn by the sound of tearing foil, the predator rose. It moved past him and vanished outside without ceremony. The mercenary watched it go, aware that if it did not return he would still owe it his life for every minute he had survived so far. It returned dragging half a carcass nearly as large as an atmospheric skimmer, hide still steaming. The kill was clean. Precise. The creature dropped it near the cavern wall and backed away, eyes on the mercenary as it did so. He stared, incredulous. "That's poison to half the species in the coalition," he said, then huffed weakly. "Guess I'm not half the species." He worked carefully, slicing charred sections from where the predator had burned the meat with its internal heat vents. His stomach rebelled at first bite, then quieted as calories hit his bloodstream. Strength seeped back into his limbs like a returning tide. He cut more than he needed and pushed a portion back toward the predator. The creature did not move immediately. It watched him for a long moment, then took the offering with a slow, deliberate motion. Not dominance. Reciprocity. Something shifted between them. Days, or what passed for days under storm-dark skies, blurred into one another. The mercenary mended gear, reset sensors to local ranges, and mapped safe routes through territory clearly claimed long before he'd arrived. The apex predator was never far. It observed his work, learned the meaning of his movements, and in turn taught him the rhythms of the death world. When danger came, it came without warning. They were moving through a ravine choked with mist when the ground erupted beneath them. A segmented horror burst upward, armored plates snapping as it lunged straight for the mercenary. He barely had time to roll aside before jaws slammed shut where his leg had been. The apex predator struck simultaneously. Its attack was not reckless. It drove into the creature's exposed joints with bone-splintering precision, forcing it into patterns the mercenary recognized instantly: constraints, angles, openings. He threw himself into the fight without hesitation, planting explosives beneath lifted plates and firing point-blank into pulsing nerve clusters. The battle was brutal and brief. When it ended, the ravine lay quiet again, the air heavy with the scent of burned ichor. The mercenary stood panting, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. The predator turned toward him, one limb twisted at an unnatural angle, armored plates cracked and bleeding. They locked gazes. Neither retreated. "I've got you," the mercenary said, already moving, tearing fabric from his suit to seal bleeding seams. His hands worked on instinct, stabilizing joints the way he'd stabilized broken soldiers 100 times before. The creature endured the contact without resistance. That night they shared the kill. The line between guardian and guarded blurred into something else entirely. The mercenary adapted his tools into traps and signal markers. The predator adjusted its patrol routes, luring threats into places where terrain and explosives turned size into liability. Together, they reshaped the rules of survival in territory that had been unchanged for centuries. The mercenary began to understand the death world not as a place of random cruelty, but as an ecosystem balanced on strength and awareness. The apex predator was not its tyrant. It was its keystone. When the mercenary finally climbed the highest ridge overlooking the forest, the predator waited at his side, staring across vast, dangerous beauty with unblinking certainty. Below them, lesser creatures fled at their combined silhouette. The mercenary felt something stir that had nothing to do with fear. "Looks like they know better now," he said softly. The predator rumbled, low and resonant, a sound that vibrated through stone and bone alike. Far above the atmosphere, unseen sensors awakened, drawn by the energy signatures of battle and life where none was supposed to thrive. The mercenary didn't know it yet, but the death world was no longer quiet. And the galaxy had just noticed. The first sign of intrusion came as a wrongness the mercenary felt in his bones before any sensor confirmed it. The forest's rhythms faltered. Migratory patterns warped. Distant predators that should have fled instead went silent all at once. He knew that silence. It belonged to ships. A thin contrail cut the storm-stained sky, artificial and obscene against the planet's churning clouds. Then another. Then 6 more, heat signatures burning downward with the patience of those who believed nothing below could resist them. The apex predator lifted its head, eyes narrowing. Its low growl carried across kilometers of ground, a warning not meant for anything that could hear it. The land answered anyway, vibrations rippling outward as lesser creatures scattered in blind panic. "They found us," the mercenary murmured. Not with relief. With grim certainty. He moved immediately, pain flaring as he ran through practiced preparations. Traps he'd built and forgotten snapped into lethal relevance. Mines were armed. False paths unmasked. He routed his remaining power cells to short-range interference bursts, knowing they would confuse enemy sensors long enough to draw them into terrain that favored the planet's real ruler. Dropships burned through cloud cover and slammed into clearings that should not have existed. Armored figures poured out, weapons raised, scanning for threats that were statistically insignificant. Over open comms, their voices carried easily. "Confirm environment secure." Visual confirmed. Target species classified as native megafauna. Human life sign probable. Proceed with capture protocols. The mercenary felt no fear, only a tightening focus. He pressed a hand to the ridge's stone, then signaled with a sharp gesture. The apex predator disappeared. The first squad advanced into the ravine where mist still clung low and thick. The ground detonated beneath them, concussive blasts shredding visors and rupturing armor seals. Survivors barely had time to scream before the creature struck from above, a thunderous blur of motion that turned trained soldiers into scattered debris. Plasma fire roared uselessly through fog and foliage. The predator was gone before return shots landed, leaving panic and blood in its wake. The mercenary picked targets with ruthless efficiency, firing only when it counted, disrupting command units and collapsing formation cohesion. They never saw him. "This is not hostile wildlife," someone shouted over comms, voice cracking. "Repeat, this is." The transmission cut off abruptly. The mercenary repositioned, drawing them deeper, marking escape vectors he knew they would trust. The apex predator anticipated those choices with uncanny accuracy, severing retreat lines and driving them into kill zones with relentless pressure. A heavy walker deployed near the forest's edge, its cannons vaporizing trees as operators attempted to burn the planet into submission. The mercenary waited until it committed, then emerged just long enough to plant charges along its exposed joint assemblies. The predator struck simultaneously, ramming the machine with earth-shaking force. The walker collapsed in a screaming cascade of molten metal and shrapnel. A command ship hovered lower, searching for clarity it would never find. The mercenary opened a channel manually, bypassing encryption with tools stolen from a dozen previous employers. "This world is claimed," he said, voice steady, unfiltered. "Leave." Static answered him, then forced laughter. "By what authority?" "By thunder." The apex predator surged into open ground, roaring skyward as lightning speared down around it, framing the creature in raw, elemental power. Its presence overwhelmed sensors, driving readings into nonsense. The mercenary continued calmly. "By the only one that matters." The command ship fired. The beam burned a trench through stone and soil, missing the predator by meters. The return strike was not technological. It was gravity, momentum, and fury. The creature leapt impossibly high, claws tearing into the ship's understructure. Armor meant for space buckled under forces it had never been designed to withstand. The mercenary detonated the final charges remotely. The sky bloomed with fire. What forces remained broke. Dropships lifted prematurely, leaving wounded, panicked survivors behind. Some fled into the forest, where the death world finished what it started without intervention. The mercenary watched from the ridge as the last unauthorized vessel escaped atmosphere, damage streaming from its hull. He exhaled slowly, allowing tension to drain from his limbs. The apex predator approached, bloodied but unbowed, eyes bright with the aftermath of combat. It stopped beside him, scanning the ruined landscape with the same calm authority it always had. "They won't be back soon," the mercenary said. "But they'll spread the story." The creature made a low, rolling sound that might have been satisfaction. Far above, emergency beacons screamed unanswered into void space. Data packets raced ahead of them, carrying reports no analyst would want to sign off on. A death world not only survived, but defended by a human and something that obeyed no hierarchy the galaxy understood. The battle was over. The consequences were just beginning. The forest was quiet in a way that seemed impossible after the chaos. Smoke still curled from ruptured dropships, the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched vegetation hanging in the air. Yet the mercenary felt no fear, only a profound, brittle calm. He had survived storms, predators, and fleets that thought humans were expendable, and he had emerged not just alive, but in command of a force the galaxy had no right to understand. The apex predator moved beside him, each step deliberate, each motion a reminder of the power it wielded. Its gaze swept over the forest floor, noting the paths he had reinforced, the traps he had set, the terrain he had turned into an extension of their will. Together they had reshaped the death world, not by domination alone, but by partnership, by shared understanding of strength, patience, and instinct. The mercenary studied the creature, noting the jagged scars that told the history of battles fought and survived, the burn marks along its flank that hinted at older conflicts with others of its kind. He had seen countless warriors fall to smaller foes than this, and yet here it was, alive, tempered, and now, aligned with him. For the first time in weeks he felt something close to respect. Humble, earned, not demanded. He crouched near a ruined dropship, scavenging supplies for later, when the apex predator nudged him with its massive head. Not a threat but a question. He understood instinctively, territory secured, survival assured, yet what now? The mercenary's hand rested briefly on the predator's armored flank. No words were necessary. Survival had become alliance. Blood had become trust. Movement in the distance drew both their attentions. Smaller creatures, alien and unfamiliar, paused, sizing them up. The mercenary assessed them quickly. Nothing could match the apex predator alone, but the calculation was simple. He had learned to move as it did. They were a single force now, human ingenuity fused with preternatural power. Any creature, any force that failed to recognize that would perish. The night deepened, and the mercenary climbed a rocky outcropping, the apex predator following silently. From this vantage, the death world unfolded in terrifying beauty. Rivers of molten rock, forests of spindly black ironwood, jagged mountains crowned with violet lightning. He realized then that the planet itself had become an extension of them. They did not merely survive here, they defined it. Voices came, carried on the wind, distant but unmistakable. Galactic survey teams. Scientists. Mercenaries. All warned, all curious, all daring to trespass into territory that now belonged to a human and the creature who had accepted him as equal. The mercenary felt a thrill. They had underestimated him once. The galaxy was about to pay attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, a scout vessel touching down on the edge of a plateau. He crouched low, hand tightening on his weapon, but instinct told him that it was unnecessary. The apex predator shifted slightly, eyes glowing in low light, reflecting unspoken understanding. This was more than deterrence. This was authority. Any who approached would recognize too late the cost of misjudging them. He stepped forward slowly, shoulders squared, voice carrying over the wind. "You have come to see the death world," he said, calm, steady. "It is not yours. It never was." The words hung in the air, deliberate and measured. No pleading. No threat. Statement. Fact. The apex predator's growl rumbled beneath the surface, resonant and pure. The air vibrated with it, a physical force that made scanners flutter and instruments shiver. The scout froze, every crew member instinctively understanding the unspoken rules: retreat or die. The mercenary's lips curved slightly. Humans had always survived against impossible odds, and now the galaxy was witnessing why. Not because of technology alone, not because of strategy, but because of the raw, unquantifiable capacity for adaptation, intelligence, and courage. The apex predator had chosen him. He had chosen it. Together they were unstoppable. The scout withdrew, engines whining in panic, leaving the plateau, leaving the death world intact. The mercenary watched until the vessel disappeared into clouds and storm, then turned to his companion. The apex predator lowered its head, brushing against him briefly, a gesture of approval, of recognition, of partnership sealed not by dominance but by mutual respect. He exhaled, surveying the land. Victory was not loud. It was a quiet assertion of power, of survival, of coexistence with something no one else could hope to understand. He realized that this partnership had changed him, not just physically hardened him, not just honed his tactical mind, but reshaped his understanding of what it meant to be human. Resourceful. Adaptable. Fearless in the face of incomprehensible danger. The storm above began to clear, revealing the violet sky fractured with lightning and stars. The mercenary felt a surge of exhilaration, of purpose. For the first time he was not running, not surviving, not hiding. He was home. The apex predator settled beside him, massive tail flicking once, a silent companion in the stillness. He raised his gaze to the horizon, where distant storms still raged, and whispered softly, almost to himself, "Let them come." The death world would endure. And now, it would endure under the guidance of a human who had conquered more than any army, and a predator who had accepted him not as prey but as equal. The wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of new arrivals, but he did not flinch. Side by side with the apex predator, he was no longer one man against the universe. He was its master, its legend, its voice. The galaxy would remember this day. Above them, lightning struck, illuminating the jagged ridges and forested valleys. The mercenary smiled. Not with arrogance. Not with fear. With the certainty of one who had survived, who had adapted, who had become something greater than the sum of his parts. And the apex predator growled low, approving, a sound that promised the world would never forget who now ruled its wild heart. The death world was theirs. And they were ready for anything.